So, the Velma show. Cool beans. Genuinely speaking, I don't think anyone asked for this. I mean, I don't know. Did you ask for it? Okay, so I'm not gonna beat around the bush about it. This show, it still sucks. It still has a 2 out of 5 star rating and a 7% or 6% audience rating. The reviews of this show is still mostly negative, but I'm not even gonna lie. Those negative reviews, to a degree at least, is actually pretty accurate for this show. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's a really sucky show. And FYI, this video is going to be long. Okay, so that being said, this show sucks ass. And you know how I know this? Because I decided to watch it in lieu of writing this script. I'm not planning on doing an episode by episode analysis of this entire season, obviously, or at least not in this video, but I will touch on some things here and there as it pertains to this video. So with that being said, let's get started with the analysis / rewrites. Before I can even touch on the matters of the actual first episode, I just need to let you fellow writers, artists, and consumers know that Velma, the show itself, has one glaring fundamental flaw that I recognize. This is a show that's supposed to be for adults, but it's actively following the story of teenagers, which is weird and doesn't make any sense. Apart from that, as soon as episode 1 began, I knew I was gonna dislike this show. I just knew I was. Writers, readers, I like to think we have a general, common understanding of how extremely important your first episode is. But if I had to break it down, I like to put it like this. Your first episode is like your first impression to the wide, very judgmental world. So obviously you should be very conscious of how well your first episode accomplishes what it's supposed to do. Think of it like putting your best foot forward when you're meeting someone new, because that's more or less what it is. The goal of your first episode, chapter, scene, whatever, is to 1, establish the world or environment, 2, establish who your main character or characters are and why we all should give a damn, 3, establish the feel or the format of your show, and lastly, 4, your first episode must hook your audience. All in all, why should they give a damn about this show? Now, I'll be totally fair. When you look at it from that sort of technical point of view, Velma hits every mark. By the end of the first episode, we, albeit somewhat vaguely, understand where the story is taking place. We know who all of the main characters are, and we can probably tell you all of said characters' goals in a single sentence, I suppose, and you can definitely tell what time this show is on literally after the very first few lines of Velma's monologue. And I mean that very literally. Every line gets more and more try hard, I guess I'll say. After Velma says, "My name is Velma Dinkley and this is my origin story," the introductory monologue ends with her saying something like, "This is my story, told my way." And it starts with a murder, bitch. And I mean,
I don't think that you should be a writer. In fact, I ask you to never write again.
Look, I'm not saying you can't or shouldn't have any cussing or anything like that. I have a potty mouth myself, just like my mom and my dad, just swearing up a storm sailor too. So trust, we cuss a lot around here, but I just feel like it was a sort of cringy, cheap way of trying to establish an adult tone. And this is a common problem with a lot of adult cartoon writers, but we'll get to that later. The dialogue in this show is honestly just painful. Like it hurts. It hurts, bestie. It hurts, friend. Like every other line in the first 10 minutes of this show is jam-packed with joke after joke, if you like to call them jokes, where they play these like sound effects almost, or like they just create these cues, so to speak, these cues where it's like we're supposed to laugh, but the problem is the jokes aren't really funny. The only thing I chuckled at, and I repeat, chuckled at very lightly for all of the first episode, was when Velma gets her first hallucination. She's like standing next to Fred and Daphne, and she's like mumbling to herself and breathing all weird, and Fred's just kind of looking at her like she's crazy, and he more or less, albeit not verbatim, says to Daphne, "What the fuck is wrong with this chick?" Other than that, everything was either not funny at all or funny in a okay, that was something that you did kind of way. Like, something else I really didn't like in the first place, or in the first episode, is when Velma goes on this like super long rant to Fred about her backstory regarding the reason behind her hallucinations. I hated that instance. I hated it. Velma's going on this long spiel about how she was a little kid and she loved solving mysteries, and her parents hid her presents, but you know, because Velma was such a great and thorough detective, my words not hers, she happened to find those presents, and somehow this completely ruins Christmas. And so her mom leaves to get milk, or get presents, and is missing shortly after. And like, oh my goodness. Okay. My thing is, I have always heard the greatest yet most simple advice in the writing world to be as follows. Ideally, a writer will show and not tell. That's like the number one writing sin. I feel like a writer for the Velma show writing a line like that. Anywho, animation and other visual mediums of storytelling often make it much easier, I'd like to believe, if nothing else, to get creative with the multitude of different ways that you can like show and not tell something. You want to tell us that a character is socially sheltered? Okay, show us how terrified or skeptical of everything they are, or how they talk in such a manner where they believe they are indisputably right without flat out telling the audience that this character is wrong, and show us instead through the consequences following that said know-it-all character coming to realize that they are in fact wrong. Bonus points if they actually learn and develop from that. If you want to show us that the character is rich, simple. Show us their grandeur lifestyle without explaining to us, the audience, something so obvious, which is that only super uber rich people can afford that way of living. Bonus points if you specify if it's old money or new money through showing us who holds the money and operates the business affairs or what have you. Okay? Like, show, don't tell. In this scenario, in this example, don't just keep telling us that the character is rich. Show us. Because I assure you, your average person can figure that stuff out themselves. You don't need to hold their hands and feed to them what they're looking at on the TV screen. Not everyone who watches TV lacks critical thinking skills and is incapable of thinking at all. That being said, I could go on, but I think the point is clear. Like, most people understand the concept of showing versus telling. I don't think Mindy Kaling does. Now, I know she's well known from her place in that show, The Office, and even though I've never actually watched much of The Office myself, I know a lot of people like that show, so I like to believe that while it's not my cup of tea, it must have done something right because so many people like it. On top of that, I know that a lot of people found Mindy entertaining on The Office as well. And I heard that she read a few episodes, cool beans, I suppose. But I think she might have been a little too excited to get a seat in the writer's room and should have invested extra time into taking a writing workshop or two. In the kindest way possible, I think she was so absorbed with trying to make a relevant show that she inadvertently made a relatively problematic show full of questionable at best humor. If it needs to be said, then I'll say it, I guess. Like, modern humor is much bigger than misandry and hating white people. And I hate that so many people don't really seem to get that. This is gonna tread murky territory, so bear with me. I get the impression that Mindy and other writers in the writer's room probably scroll through TikTok or Twitter or whatever, no different than most of the rest of us, and they see all these posts criticizing things like colonial America and the remnants of the colonial mindset that might be present in some Anglo-Saxon communities or cultures, if I'll go so far as to say that today, but there's a problem here. There is no other way to say it. You can't keep taking jabs at a portion of your fan base. Like, as far as the direction she could have took Velma in if she wanted to. And I'm not saying that this is better. I'm not saying that this will solve all the problems. I'm not saying anyone is going to like it. This is a disclaimer. This is just my opinion of what could have made this rewrite work just a little bit better. Just a bit. So in this rewrite, the setting takes place at Coolsville University, where our leading lady Velma is attending as a graduate student, furthering her study of, let's just say, forensic pathology, because I think that's believable enough, right? While the white coat is like a little overkill and not exactly the standard these days, I couldn't help choosing to go in that direction because, Americans, I'm pretty sure most of y'all watching this are Americans. Americans, at least, we still tend to associate long white coats with highly skilled medical field associates, and I don't know. Anyway, I like to think I kept the color scheme pretty on point in regards to Velma's typical palette. So while there's obviously a lot of white here now, as well as some yellow in her gold tinted glasses, I like to think that if someone was looking at this series premiere poster for the first time, they'd be able to connect the dots that this character is obviously Velma, or at least filling Velma's role, but just to know this character is actually Velma. I decided to go with a sort of Merle-esque background featuring the rest of the mystery gang as we remember them. Fred all the way to the left, Scooby and Norville, aka Shaq. I'll get to them in a minute. And finally Daphne, who I honestly could have drawn so much better, but for now this will have to do. I'm so sorry, Daphne, with your fat ass head looking like a damn fat head. Let's imagine that the episode begins with Velma dropping her book to the ground, standing over a dying body. The victim looks to Velma and says something, but Velma is too busy calling the cops to listen to whatever the victim is saying. The scene transitions to Velma being vehemently interrogated for a few days. She narrates to the audience something along the lines of, eventually it was obvious I didn't do it, and I wasn't much help anyway since I didn't witness the crime. Sorry, I don't voice act. Sorry, guys. A few more days and eventually, weeks go by, as does the following investigation surrounding the victim's murder. And let's call the victim Chang, just to give them a name. Chang's murder begins to be rumored to be a result of aggravated assault gone wrong, and it's determined that he was murdered by 2 gunshot wounds to the abdomen. However, Velma knows something about Chang. He has enemies, big wig enemies. She isn't aware of all their names except one, Skip Jones. As she begins to further suspect that investigators may do away with Chang's case, to avoid any conflict with these bigwigs, Velma starts to consider other options. She reaches out to a local private investigative company. When she gives them details as to what kind of concerns she has, she is ultimately turned away on a basis of lacking evidence, suggesting that her claims of a poorly managed investigation are plausible. Dejected, Velma wonders what to do. But like any other protagonist, she realizes that she doesn't have to be a bystander, and she can take matters into her own hands. So far, Lady Luck is on her side, as Velma's request draws the attention of the hockey jock Fred, who takes it upon himself to help Velma conduct her investigation anyway. Turns out, Fred and Chang played sports together when they both played soccer at one point, and even after Fred switched to pursue hockey, he and Chang stayed in touch from time to time. They hung around each other enough for Fred to realize what kind of targets Chang held on his back. So Fred shared Velma's skepticism of the faithfulness of the police's efforts to solve this murder. And if it needs to be said, like, this Fred isn't going to be very different from Himbo Fred, most well known from Scooby-Doo's Mystery Incorporated, the best Scooby-Doo show in the franchise. Anyway, Fred and Velma begin going over what they know, and a little reluctantly, Velma admits to Fred that she's aware of a bias that his father, Skip Jones, has against Chang. But the problem is, she doesn't know what the details of that bias is. Fred acknowledges that when his dad makes enemies, he often persecutes them to the fullest extent, no mercy. And so simply asking about it likely won't do them any good. After all, Fred's father has a reputation to maintain, so even sharing secrets with his own son isn't an available option. Fred doesn't let this deter him and tells Velma about a friend he knows, who's basically the guy who knows a guy that knows a guy. This is where we meet our beloved Scooby-Doo and also Scooby-Doo's handler, who is not Shaggy. See, Fred's childhood buddy, Norville, aka Shaggy, was a real chill dude who got along with everybody with very little effort. But the guy bounced around so much that even when he came to Coolsville to settle down and continue pursuing his career in criminal psychology, he just couldn't really seem to stay in one place. He was always or almost always gone. And it sucked that Fred and Velma came all the way to Shaggy's spot, because the plan was to consult Shaggy about these recent events and ponder over any potential leads. However, this new guy, he's here instead. And this new guy in question, he introduces himself as Chandler, but everyone calls him Shaq. Shaggy basically up and dipped some time ago to whoever knows where and asked Shaq to watch over his apartment in the meantime. Being such good friends and owing Shaggy a favor anyway, Shaq agreed. Shortly after, Velma and Fred banter with Shaq as they get to know his huge dog and, all that good shit, what have you. But then they realize what kind of vest Scooby's wearing, and he's not wearing it in his poster, but let's pretend that he is. They realize what kind of vest Scooby's wearing, and Velma and Fred realize that Scooby-Doo is a seeing eye dog. Shaq is blind. The first thing Fred blurts out is, why in the world would Shaggy ask a blind man to watch over his apartment? To which Shaq says nothing gets past him in Scooby-Doo. Even though Fred and Velma came there looking for Shaggy, turns out that Shaq is just as much help as Shaggy would have been. When informed about the recent murder and Velma and Fred's concerns, Shaq mentions someone he could introduce them to who investigates stuff like that thoroughly. From here, we meet Daphne. I imagine that over the course of this story, each episode or every 2 episodes will cover a small crime or mystery from beginning to end. These mini mysteries from every episode or 2 will further the gang's progress on the biggest mystery of all, Chang's death until the very end of the season. But that's just my idea on what could have been done with Velma, and it's only a glimpse of it. Truth be told, I will take it a step further and admit that honestly, I don't really feel like the show needed to exist at all, to be honest. Because often I watch and I rewatch clips from the show in the first episode, and I just constantly wonder, I mean, like I said before, who would actually enjoy this show? Who is this show made for? And what exactly is anyone supposed to take away from this show? I keep wondering if the state of this show is due to poor writing or a lack of necessity to the public. Meaning, there's a chance that since no one asked for this show anyway, no one is really checking for it. Then again, it's probably just Velma's overall lack of focus on efficient storytelling that makes it painful to watch. I don't know. You tell me. So that being said, why don't you also tell me in the comments below what sort of plans you would have for Velma if you were in Minnie Kaling's position? Or even funnier, how would you have approached the development of this show if you were her co-writer? I bet the arguments people would have had with her would have been hilarious. Like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with a friend even. You guys are great. Thanks for listening. If you really stuck even halfway through this video, you are a fucking trooper. Thank you so much. And all of you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful night.